All right, welcome. This will be a two-part series on depth of field. The first part will cover a static depth of field, and the second part will cover an animating depth of field. So we're using the standard animating camera scene. So that's what I have loaded here, which is just the two objects scene that we had from before. So I want to set up a depth of field so that the first static one will have the vase here as the focal point, and the ball will get come into the depth of field when it hits. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to View and select Camera. And I should say that the focal length of the camera does accentuate or de-accentuate the effect. So as we get a higher focal length, tends to have narrower depth of field, whereas we have a wider focal length, a smaller focal length. It de-accentuates, it widens the depth of field. So I'm going to up the focal length of this perspective camera to 100. So I'm just going to type in 100 and enter. And you'll notice that zooms me in, makes the field of view much smaller. It also foreshortens or stacks, I should say, the perspective so that as you go up in focal length, the perspective begins to get closer and closer to flat. So I'm just going to maneuver the camera until we're looking at the vase kind of head on. Okay, just kind of like that. Usually it's a good time to bookmark. So I'll call this DOF1. Enter, close. So I have this if I move the camera, because I am using the perspective camera and I may wind up moving it. Okay. So I also want to go to the attribute editor now. Here, Control A is another method to get to it. I already have depth of field on here. Let me turn this off. Actually, I was animating this, so I'm just going to right-click on the focus region scale and choose break connection. That severs the connection there. So it's no longer animating, and I'll just type in 1, and I'll turn off the depth of field. All right, so when you come to this, you'll probably see it turned off and some other values here. So don't worry about that part. So I'm going to activate it. So that's what you should do. The first thing that activates the camera depth of field. The first thing I need to deal with is the focus distance. Now, our focus distance won't change, so it won't animate. And it's what the object of focus of the camera is. So in this case, it's the vase. So I'm just going to click on it. Oh, let me go back to the channel box and click this little R so it takes it out of reference. I'll go back to the attribute editor. I'll go to View, select Camera, and I'll select the vase. Let me actually go back to View, select Camera here for a moment. I want to find out how far from my camera position the vase is. Okay, that's the focus distance, the distance from the camera position to the object that's being focused on. That's the focus distance. That's the vase here in this case. So to find that number out, I go to Display, Heads Up Display, Object Details. Whoops, Heads Up Display, Object Details. And that gives me a number of information about objects in my scene, as well as the distance from the camera. Okay, so I'm going to simply select the vase, and I'm going to copy this number down. So 36.5. We'll remember it, because once I click off and reselect the camera, then this number will disappear because I've selected the camera and not the vase. So, and there's no way to copy this number from this position. So I just note it on a piece of paper. I'm going to go back to View, Select Camera, and I'm going to type that number into the focus depth here. So I just shortened it 36.5, enter. I'm going to lower my f-stop. So I'm going to do something really low, like maybe 2.8. The lower the f-stop, the more foreshortened, the more critical the depth of field, the more narrow the depth of field. And I'll talk about this focus region scale in a moment. So I've entered in the distance from the camera. The f-stop I lowered just arbitrarily, although I could have left it as it is. And now I'm going to want to see my result here in the viewport. So I'm going to go up to the icons on the top here, and I'm going to find this little square, this little blue square with a dimmer blue square behind it, right here. And I'm going to click on it, and that activates the depth of field. So you'll notice that very narrow area is actually in depth. Now we don't want to move this. If we move it, if we move the camera, we're changing the distance from the camera. So we can get different things depending on if we're getting to that distance from the camera, but you know, we're moving the camera. So I'm going to go back to my bookmark. And you'll notice that it's a very narrow depth of field. That's because I have a very low f-stop. If I raise the f-stop slightly, you'll notice that I'm bringing, and you can really see it on the table, I'm bringing more of the table in. And finally, like the ball. So you can set your depth of field here, or the net, whether you want a very narrow depth of field or a very deep depth of field, will be determined by the size of the f-stop. As the f-stop increases, the field increases. So you can see this in the animation pretty well. As the animation, as the ball begins out of the depth of field and then comes into the depth of field. So the focus region scale is set to a value of 100%. If I want to if I have a large scene, or I get to the very end of my f-stop and I'm still not having a large enough depth of field, or I'm getting to the very end of my f-stops here and I'm not having a sufficiently narrow depth of field, I can use the region scale as kind of a multiplier. So if I go to 0.5, it kind of halves this value. And if I go to 2, it doubles the value of your f-stop. So you can look at the focus region scale as a multiplier. Sometimes if I have a scene with objects that are very far apart, this can be raised quite a bit to allow objects that are very far apart to come in and out of focus much faster than if you have this set to 1 here. So that's the static depth of field. Next class, or next tutorial, I'll look at having an animated depth of field, maybe one that follows the ball.